Namaste. I'm Isha Das, and welcome to another podcast in the series of Wrestling with God. 2 or 3 weeks ago, my wife, Vicki, sitting next to me, she is my better half, and I tell her all the time, almost every day, that when I married her, I won the marriage lottery. Anyways, we got a lot of good feedback on the way we work together, she presenting the questions and me answering them. So we're going to do this again and make it a regular part of the podcast series. Although one of these days I am going to ask her the questions, because in reality, she's smarter than I am. So welcome, Vicki Jo.
Well, thank you. I'm glad to do this with you, honey.
All right, so let's just start running. So what's the first question?
Are you ready?
I'm ready. These? I'm all ready.
I picked some really, really easy ones this time.
Oh, yeah, I don't believe you, but go ahead.
Okay. So the first one that I picked is from a young woman, actually not too far away from here. Tell me why religions all stress do's and don'ts. What is that about? It tends to make me feel guilty.
Okay, that's a good question. And I hear that kind of question a lot with people. So let me start here. All of the world's religions, I'm going to say it in two ways, have some form of the do's and the don'ts. The classic yoga has the yamas and the niyamas. The Judeo-Christian tradition has the 10 Commandments, for example. It's a little bit reductionistic to talk about them as do's and don'ts. It really doesn't capture the essence of what these religious traditions are trying to say to us. So let me say it this way. God has created creation with absolute mathematical precision. Let me give you some examples. An atom of gold, if I remember correctly, has 79 protons and 79 electrons. All atoms of gold have that proton-electron configuration. An atom of silver has 47 protons and 47 electrons. That's part of what makes silver silver and what makes gold gold. Again, there's this mathematical precision built into atoms themselves. Let's take it on a bigger level. If the Earth were a little bit closer or a little bit further from the sun, we would not have life on planet Earth as we know it. It's precisely the right distance to have the flourishing of life as we know it. Mm-hmm. That's part of the mathematical precision. We also know that there's, in terms of just food, for example, we know that the human body thrives on fresh fruit, fresh vegetables, and organic food, what is natural. And we know that the body suffers when we eat too much processed food. So we see an order there. We call that the natural order of things. And then there's a psychological order too. So for example, we know psychologically that we do better in life when we have positive goals that we are focused on. When we don't have positive goals, our psyche tends to go in different directions and actually tends to disintegrate. So psychologically, there is this precision, again, that when we have something that we're focused on that is positive, it really helps us to thrive emotionally and mentally. Now, spiritually or morally, there is that same kind of precision. So we know, for example, let's think of the 10 Commandments for a moment. To steal from somebody what doesn't belong to them, that creates chaos and it creates suffering. Let's look at something in American history and actually world history. We know that when we enslave other people and take away their natural rights and freedoms, it causes them to suffer, and it also causes us to suffer. So there is a moral order to the universe. And what that moral order really is, it's the mind of God motivated by love. It's the mind of God trying to direct and organize our life so that we thrive. So I always encourage people not to see the do's and the don'ts as do's and don'ts, but to see them as a wonderful, dynamic, loving order reflecting the mind, and the love of God. And our relationship is to have, and the goal is to have a dynamic relationship with this natural order, with the mind of God within creation. And the more we attune ourselves morally to this natural order, to the mind of God, we really thrive as human beings in every way.
So what you're talking about is more like natural consequence of our behavior, not a God who's looking down and saying, you did that, so I'm going to punish you. But the natural consequence, like if I jumped off the roof, obviously I break something or hurt myself.
Yes.
That's not God punishing me. That's the consequence of my behavior.
Absolutely. So, yeah, there is no little man, little woman upstairs counting our pluses and our minuses and then doling out punishments and rewards. The more we live in union with the natural order, the more we just tend to thrive as human beings. And the more that we live out of the natural order, again, just focus on something as simple as organic food. We thrive physically. It's the same thing with the moral order. And let me reduce it to this. What we're really talking about, all of these moral codes that are given to us, all the do's and the don'ts, what they all really boil down to is love. Love always serves the highest good of other people and themselves. Love never does any harm. Doesn't mean that it doesn't speak some harsh truth sometimes, but even in speaking harsh truths, the purpose of love is to build up and to elevate us. So all of the moral norms can be reduced to what Jesus said: loving God and loving our neighbors as an extension of ourselves.
So two things I'm thinking. One is the end of her question was, it makes her feel guilty. So do you have any thoughts about that? And
Yeah, well, let me answer it first so I don't forget. There's two kinds of guilt. There's neurotic guilt, and some of us are just more neurotically oriented. We feel guilty for everything. That guilt is really just born of the tyrannical ego, and it serves no purpose at all.
Mhm.
I think we can differentiate that from remorse, that there are times when I know that I haven't loved. I know that I've done the opposite of love. And in doing the opposite of love, there is a discomfort, a pain. My conscience is stirred. So that kind of discomfort is not neurotic guilt. It's not some God hating us, and it's not about us hating ourselves. It's just recognizing that we've done something that isn't of love. And that prick of the conscience is just meant to stir us and move us in the right direction, never to condemn us.
So that piece is when you have a healthy conscience,
Yes.
then you're bound to feel some sort of regret for behavior that isn't in the natural order.
Yes.
Is that what you're saying?
Yeah. Yes. It's interesting what Yogananda said, Paramahansa Yogananda. He said, conscience is the voice of God, not as a punishing God, but as the voice of love, directing us always towards our highest good and the highest good of others.
What about a person that really tries to live by the yamas and the niyamas and all the commandments and tries to live in a loving way, but then all these things, it's not because they're not in the natural order, but bad things happen to good people. Remember that book?
Yes.
That's still bound to happen, even if you live in the natural order as much as you can, correct?
Yeah, there's no guarantee that if we live a moral life, there's no guarantee that everything's going to turn out good. But this is the secret that most of us don't know, that to the degree that we live in harmony with the natural order, to the degree that our lives are directed by truth, beauty, and goodness, there's a strength of character that develops. There's an innate level of courage that develops. There's an innate level of wisdom, so that when things go south, and they will go south for all of us at some point, we can handle it with dignity, we can handle it with love, and we can handle it with wisdom. Like, no matter how moral we are, no matter how well we eat, so on and so forth, we're all going to die. The body, sooner or later, is going to give up on us. The body is going to start to decay. If we're rooted, if we've lived our life in the flow of this natural order based in love, then yeah, we're going to feel pain around death. We may feel some sadness, but we will have the courage to face it with dignity and with love and with wisdom. So that's why the moral order, quote unquote, the yamas and the niyamas, the 10 commandments, they really are like a rock that we build our lives on, that help us to experience all the deeper things in life that we are looking for.
Good, Connie.
Okay, you got another question?
I do have another question. This is
Just come over a little bit so you're
okay. All right, so this is a good question. This has come up many times in discussions with people before. So, hasn't religion caused more problems than it solves?
Another great question. First of all, I'm trying not to be an apologist for religion per se, because religion has created suffering in the world. For example, within Christianity, many people who have proclaimed themselves to be Christian have not lived their lives in accordance with Jesus's teachings. Mm-hmm. So, yes, religion has caused many, many people to suffer deeply. However, once a society takes religion out of the context, takes God out of the context, the suffering increases 100-fold. Think of Hitler. He did away, so to speak, with the Christianity of his youth, and look at the suffering that he imposed. Think of Stalin in communist Russia. They were officially an atheistic country. And just think of the tens of millions of his own people that suffered because of that. And I think there's that line by Lenin when people talked about all the suffering that was happening in the Soviet Union. He said, you need to crack a few eggs to make an omelet. Think of Mao's China, the suffering that they imposed on their people, so that when you take God out of the equation, you actually multiply the suffering. It's much worse, because if I'm not answering to a higher moral order, then I become the arbiter of right and wrong. I become the judge of what is true and what is not true, what is good and what is not good. And the tendency for the ego and the dark side of human nature to take over, it just explodes. It just blossoms in a negative way. So I understand the question. And yes, religion has a shadow side. We all have a shadow side. We all have a dark side. But once you take, again, religion, a sense of a higher power, a higher authority, you take that out of the equation, then what we tend to become are rational animals. And rational animals are far more dangerous than irrational animals. There's something about when religion is lived in a right way, in a solid way, that it actually makes a society healthier. It enhances human rights. It doesn't take away from them. How's that?
Good. I'm thinking of, sometimes we hear about all of the conflict in religion, like the Crusades or like the priest abuse and what the church has done bad. Can you give some examples? Because you're a learned theologian and I'm not. Of course, I get all the stories wrong from the Bible. But can you give some examples of some of the good things that religion, not just the Catholic Christian religion, the Jewish religion, or the Hindu religion, Buddhist religion, some of the good things that have come out of religion? Because we don't hear about that very much.
Right, but just a little comment. I may be more technically a theologian, but I talk the talk, you walk the talk.
I walk the talk.
Yes.
I don't know about that.
Yeah, again, a lot of times when we have these discussions, what gets focused on almost exclusively is the shadow side of religion. And the shadow side is there. There's no excuse for it. And we have to look at it and we have to own it. But what we often do in that context is that we ignore the light side. So let me just talk about Catholicism for a moment, and then I will expand it. Just think that, the Catholic Church has made many, many mistakes throughout its history, and most recently with the sex abuse scandal. But it's also created more orphanages, more schools, more homes for the homeless than virtually every other institution. Think of what Mother Teresa did. So if we're going to judge religion, and we should judge it, but we have to look at both the shadow side, but we also have to look at the light side, the good side, what religion does. And it's not just in Catholicism or Christianity. Last week, I did a podcast with Swami Nirvanananda, a Hindu monk, a Hindu Swami. And he spends a good part of his life supporting orphanages in India, schools for children of lepers, programs that take young women who are caught up in prostitution off the streets and gives them housing and teaches them a trade. So in all of the religion, Buddhism, there's the stress on compassion and not doing any harm to any living thing. So all of the world's religious traditions have a shadow side, but the light side is very, very bright. And those of us that identify with a religion, we have to be humble and honest about the dark side, and we have to be humble and honest about the dark side in each one of us, and simultaneously look at the light side, look at the truth, beauty, and good that it brings, and that we can bring in the world. And I just want to stress this point, just as religion has a shadow side, all human beings have a shadow side. And I'm getting off on a tangent here for a moment, but let me just go there. Part of what we see in our society now is that everybody is projecting their shadows onto some other group. So the far right wingers demonize the left, people on the left side of the political spectrum. The people on the far left demonize the people on the right. People who have gotten vaccines demonize those that haven't. Those that haven't tend to demonize those that have. And so all of society is just caught up in this projection of the shadow onto other groups. What we all have to do individually and corporately as a religion and as communities is take a look at our own shadow while simultaneously bringing out the best side of us.
It's funny, I was thinking when you were talking of when we go to Assisi and how they incorporate in Assisi.
Assisi, Italy, she's talking
right,
about.
They incorporate into the whole culture of the town and city of Assisi. It's very full of Francis of Assisi. So you go into a bank and you see a big picture of Jesus on the wall in a bank, which of course you would never see probably in many other places. But there's also a real feel of the sacred there and holy and peace, and even the stories around Assisi. There's a story, you can probably tell it better, about when Nazi Germany was attacking Italy.
Yeah, the very first time I went to Assisi, Italy, many, many years ago, decades ago, I met a Jewish woman from Rome, and people don't know that there's a Jewish population within the city of Rome. And every year she would go to Assisi. And so I asked her, I said, tell me why you, a Jewish woman, every year make a pilgrimage to Assisi, Italy. And what she said to me was, as a little girl, her family during the Second World War, when the Jews were being persecuted, her family moved to Assisi. And the priests and the nuns and even the bishop's residence and the people of Assisi took in the Jewish people, gave them more Italian sounding names, more Catholic sounding names, gave them papers, and kind of hid them and protected them during the Second World War. And not one of those Jewish families perished at the hands of the Nazi regime. So what she said to me was, make no mistake about it, I am Jewish, but makes me tear up. She said, I come every year to thank Francis for protecting us and for protecting our people. So yeah, it's easy to focus on the dark side. We have to focus on the light side. And I want to take this a level deeper. And I haven't thought this through thoroughly, so I'm not quite sure how it's going to sound. There are various institutions, agencies within the human family that try to express what human life is all about and our deepest values. At one level, it's science, and really all that science really describes is how the material life functions. There's politics, and the politics can sometimes tap into some deep part of us, but it operates at a certain level. Unfortunately, far too often on a superficial level. And then there's philosophy and psychology, and they capture a little bit deeper of the human experience. Psychology, for example, captures what's going on inside of us, what's happening between our unconscious mind and our conscious minds, maybe what's happening neurologically, etc. But psychology doesn't even get to the deepest part of who we are. Religion and religious language, and not just Christianity, it can be Hinduism, Islam, its language and its symbolism and its stories go to a far deeper level and give expression to our deepest human aspirations, our deepest human suffering, what gives us meaning, the language and the story. So, for example, you have the story in the Bhagavad Gita of a civil war that's going on and the conversation between Arjuna and his guru, Krishna. You read that and you see it captures part of our daily struggle to find our place in the world and how we live out our dharma, how we live out the path that we've been called to live. You have the story of Jesus's crucifixion, where and even if you don't believe it, just see the symbolism. You have God and you have suffering. What does that story tell us? That God is with us in the depth of our suffering. That even in the worst of our dark periods, we're not alone. God is with us. That's what the crucifixion, one of the truths that the crucifixion speaks. Rightly understood, you go to the stories the story of creation in Genesis and read it not as scientific history, but read it as meta truth. It's all about us. So I think it's the language of religion, it's the stories of religion that really capture what is most human to us and what is most near and dear to us, and really what helps us to then embody those values. Rational thought can go so far, but it doesn't touch us at the depth of our souls. And I think, again, the religious stories that have been passed on to us and traditions, they have a way of getting into the deepest aspect of our humanity and bringing forth what is best in us. How's that?
Yeah, it's good.
Good.
You ready for a couple more?
I'm ready for a couple more. Yep, we got time and I have the energy.
Okay, so let me look at the third one. Oh, this is just a little one.
Okay.
A friend recently asked me if I believe in God. I didn't know how to answer. What does the question even mean?
I like that question because I don't like when people ask me, do you believe in God? I don't like the question. First of all, what do we mean by belief? And secondly, what do we mean by God? And that could be a whole podcast in and of itself. But secondly, it tends to be propositional. And what do I mean by that? Do you believe in a belief about God? Do you believe in a belief about life? It's like, do you believe in some philosophical, dogmatic, theological proposition? And I'm not saying that theological propositions don't have some value, but they're propositions. They're heady. They're intellectual. That question in and of itself doesn't tap into the real reality of what the word God symbolizes. So for me, it's not about, do you believe in God or not? For me, it's, have you experienced pure love? Have you experienced the power of love? Have you experienced the healing energy of love? If you have, then you have experienced some aspect of God. Let me just finish. I don't want to lose this thought. And so it's not about believing in a proposition. Going back to the question about religion, too many people have believed in Christianity's propositions without believing in the Christ consciousness, without being immersed in that stream of love. So for me, the real question is, the word God represents absolute reality, which is love. Love manifested as truth, beauty, and goodness. So for me, the real question is, have you jumped into that stream of love? Are you allowing love to guide your life in ever deepening and expansive ways? If you are, then you are in the stream of God's love.
I think you have a reference point of God. You've studied theology. You have deeply experienced the Christ consciousness, I think, in some ways, or the God feel. But for people that have not, I think when they ask that question, they're asking, do you believe in God? Do you believe in God, the guy in the sky kind of thing?
Right.
Do you know what I mean?
Right. Well, I've probably shared this story before in a previous podcast, but many years ago, I did a training, a meditation training and stress reduction for business people. It wasn't a religious event at all, or an explicitly spiritual event. It was just about reducing stress and being more functional at work and in one's life. But I did at one point throw the word God in to the mix, just to kind of stir the pot a little bit for people. And a very bright woman came to me afterwards, a lawyer, and she said, I don't believe in God. And what I said to her is, the God that you say doesn't exist, because, again, when most people hear the question, do you believe in God, in some way, shape, or form, they think of a superhero in the sky, a demigod in the sky. And that's not God. That can be at a very low resolution level. That can be, can reflect God, but God is not a superhero in the sky. And so anyways, this woman then asked a second question. She said, well, what do you mean by God? And I said to her, you're married? And she said, yes. And I said, do you have children? And she said, yes. And I said, how deeply do you love your children? And she said, I love them beyond what I can express. And I said, okay, let's start there. That is the experience of God. The word God is the word that we use to express an absolute reality that really can't be put into words. But since we are human beings, we have to try to put it into words. And I still think the best word, properly understood, is love. And I think almost everybody listening, or you, would either be dead or in a mental hospital, have experienced profound moments of love. In those moments, you've got a glimpse of what God is and what the word God points to. That love can come through nature, that love can come in a religious context. It can come, often initially comes in the context of a human relationship where we are giving and receiving love. And if it's pure love, if it's selfless love, then we are in the stream of consciousness referred to as God.
I know when a while back, probably 10 or 12 years ago, I read this book called The God Gene. It was interesting, but he had come across people that couldn't get the concept of that deity up in the sky out of their minds. And what he had them do is take the 3 letters God and think of the guiding, organizing, designing aspect that brings all things into creation.
It goes back to the very first question about the natural order.
Yeah.
It's the God. It's a very good point. God is the guiding, organizing, and designing intelligence and force that weaves everything together. Let me give one more qualification. Because we're human beings, so I'm saying that God is love, and I think that's the best way to describe it. It's what Yogananda says. It's what the Bible says. But, we are human beings, and so we are people, and so we need to, in some way, shape, or form, personify that for us. And I think that's where the world's great religious saints and sages come into play. That's where somebody like Jesus of Nazareth comes into play, that he becomes, for example, the face of God, the embodiment of God. And because again, we're human being and we are persons and we are people, we need some kind of personification of that. Very often, my dear wife, you personify for me God's love. You love so well and so completely.
Even when I ask you to empty the dishwasher.
Even when you
do
empty
wash,
the dishwasher, go grocery shopping, shovel the snow. Yes. So yes, God is this ocean of unconditional love. And as human beings, we experience that in many ways. And we do need most of us need some kind of way to personify that so that we can relate to it, because we are people, we are persons.
Oftentimes people will say that they might not believe in God. And I'll ask them, well, when do you feel the most peace, or when do you feel this kind of out of body experience of love and goodness? And they'll say in nature. So maybe beauty too.
Oh yeah.
Truth, beauty, goodness, love.
Yeah, I'm going to do some podcasts in the future on truth, beauty, and goodness. Those are all manifestations of this divine energy. Those are all manifestations of this divine love. And there are degrees of brightness, there are degrees of clarity with it. But yeah, those are all, anything that has the scent of truth, beauty, and goodness, anything that elevates us and makes us better is in some way, shape, or
I'm sorry, I'm gonna get him. I'll be right back. Because he personifies love.
Personifies love too.
Come here, Dio. Do you want to meet people? And then maybe he'll.
And maybe this is good. He wants us to end. This is good. This is our cat D-O-G. And his name is spelled D-O-G because he acts more like a dog sometimes than a cat, but we love him. And his love, God's love, this force and energy, this force field of love comes through our cats. We all know, for example, that dogs love with a degree of unconditional love. So this is D-O-G, and it's just probably a good point to end, a good spot to end. So wherever we experience truth, beauty, and goodness, those forces, those energies that elevate us and make us better, more loving, kinder, more truthful, more courageous, all of that is an aspect of what we refer to as God. Okay. So I want to thank you, honey, for joining again. I want to thank you, D-O-G, for being with us. Hold them up a little more so they can see their whole face.
He just needs attention after all day of doing our work. He just tells us that he needs our attention.
So thank you, D-O-G. Thank you, my wife. Thank you for joining us. God bless you, and we'll see you in the next podcast.
I'll have more really good questions in a couple months.
Yeah, right? You like to stump the chump.
Yeah, I do.
God bless. Bye.
Bye.